Black Hawk helicopter shuddered through the Afghan night sky, its rotors beating a rhythm that had become as familiar to Lieutenant Commander Jake "Reaper" Morrison as his own heartbeat. Inside the cramped cabin, 6 men sat in disciplined silence, their faces painted in shades of black and green, transforming them into shadows among shadows. The red interior lights cast an eerie glow across their features, making them look like warriors from some ancient hell. Morrison checked his HK-416 rifle for the 3rd time in 10 minutes. Muscle memory. 20 years in the teams had taught him that the little rituals kept you alive. Check your weapon. Trust your training. Bring your brothers home. His father had whispered those same words to him the night before his first deployment, back when Morrison was a young, eager SEAL thinking he was invincible. 5 minutes, the crew chief's voice crackled through their headsets. Morrison glanced at his team. Petty Officer First Class Miguel Rodriguez, his spotter and best friend, sat across from him cleaning his scope one last time. Next to Rodriguez was Petty Officer Second Class David Chen, their communications specialist, fingers dancing nervously over his encrypted radio gear. Then there was Chief Petty Officer James "Doc" Williams, their corpsman, checking his medical supplies with the focused intensity of a man who knew he'd probably need them before sunrise. Petty Officer Martinez, their breacher, sat stone-faced, hands resting on the explosive charges strapped to his vest. And finally, the youngest of their team, Petty Officer Jackson, barely 23 years old but already a veteran of 17 combat missions. The mission brief had been straightforward. Extract a high-value intelligence asset from a Taliban compound in the Hindu Kush Mountains before dawn. The asset was a former Taliban commander who'd switched sides, providing the CIA with information about an imminent attack on a NATO base. Intelligence suggested the compound held maybe 10 to 15 fighters. Standard extraction. In and out in 20 minutes. But Morrison's gut was churning. He'd learned long ago to trust that feeling. It had saved his life in Ramadi, in Helmand Province, in a dozen nameless villages where death waited around every corner. "Boss, you good?" Rodriguez's voice cut through his thoughts. Morrison nodded, meeting his friend's eyes. Rodriguez had been with him for 8 years. They'd bled together, fought together, dragged each other out of hell more times than either could count. Rodriguez could read Morrison's moods better than his ex-wife ever could. "Just thinking," Morrison replied quietly. "Don't," Rodriguez grinned, his teeth white against his painted face. "Thinking gets you killed. Reacting keeps you alive." 2 minutes, the crew chief announced. The helicopter banked hard left, dropping altitude fast. Morrison's stomach lurched as they descended toward the landing zone. Through the open door, he could see the Afghan landscape below, an endless expanse of jagged mountains and deep valleys, all painted in shades of silver by the 3/4 moon. It was beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way. It was also the most dangerous terrain on Earth. 1 minute, green light in 60 seconds. Morrison stood, his team rising with him in perfect synchronization. They moved to the door, hands gripping the fast rope. The wind howled through the cabin, carrying the smell of dust and aviation fuel and something else, something that smelled like danger. 30 seconds. Morrison could see the landing zone now, a flat stretch of rocky ground 2 kilometers from their target. Intelligence had chosen it specifically because it was far enough from the compound to avoid detection, but close enough for a quick infiltration. The helicopter flared, hovering 10 feet above the ground. "Green light, go, go, go." Morrison grabbed the rope and dropped into the darkness. His boots hit the ground hard, knees absorbing the impact. He immediately moved away from the landing zone, weapon up, scanning for threats. His team landed behind him in rapid succession. Rodriguez, Chen, Williams, Martinez, Jackson. 6 shadows materializing from the night. The Black Hawk banked away, its roar fading into the distance until only the wind remained. Morrison activated his night vision goggles, and the world transformed into shades of green and black. He could see every rock, every shadow, every potential threat within 300 meters. "Radio check," Chen whispered. Each team member responded in turn, their voices barely audible even through the encrypted comms. "2 clicks northeast," Morrison said, consulting his GPS. "We move in two-man columns. Rodriguez, you're with me. Chen, Williams, you're second. Martinez, Jackson, rear security. Weapons tight unless compromised. We ghost through this." They moved through the Afghan night like specters. Morrison set a brutal pace. They had to reach the compound before dawn, complete the extraction, and reach the secondary extraction point before the sun exposed them. In Afghanistan, daylight meant death for American operators. The Taliban owned these mountains during the day. After 40 minutes of hard movement through rocky terrain, Morrison raised his fist. The team froze. He pointed to a ridge ahead. Beyond it lay their target, a compound of mud brick walls and stone buildings nestled in a narrow valley. Intelligence photos had shown a typical Afghan compound. A main building, a few outbuildings, walls about 8 feet high, home to their asset and supposedly a dozen Taliban fighters. Morrison crawled to the ridge and raised his scope. The compound lay 300 meters below, bathed in pre-dawn darkness. He scanned systematically, the walls, the courtyard, the buildings, the approaches. His blood ran cold. No sentries. No guards on the walls. No dogs barking. No movement at all. Every instinct Morrison had developed over 2 decades of combat screamed at him. This was wrong. Compounds always had guards, always. The Taliban might be many things, but they weren't careless. Not here, not in their own territory. "Boss," Rodriguez whispered, crawling up beside him, "you seeing this?" "Yeah," Morrison breathed, "it's too quiet." "We scrub the mission." Morrison considered it. They could call for extraction, report the anomaly, come back with a larger force. But the asset's intelligence suggested an attack was imminent, possibly within 48 hours. If they didn't extract him tonight, hundreds of NATO troops could die. "We proceed," Morrison decided. "But we go in hot, expect contact, tell the team." Rodriguez nodded and passed the word. Morrison watched his men's body language shift subtly. They'd been expecting a routine extraction. Now they were preparing for a fight. They descended the ridge in complete silence, moving from cover to cover. The compound walls loomed ahead, dark and imposing. Morrison checked his watch. 4:47 hours, 13 minutes until sunrise. They had to move fast. At the base of the wall, Martinez placed shaped charges on the locks of the main gate. Morrison positioned his team, Rodriguez and Williams covering the gate, Chen ready with the radio, Martinez and Jackson providing rear security. Morrison's finger rested on his trigger guard, every muscle coiled and ready. Martinez gave the countdown with his fingers, 3, 2, 1. The charges detonated with a muffled crack. The gates swung open. Morrison moved through, weapon up, scanning for targets. The courtyard was empty. The buildings were dark. Nothing moved in the shadows. Too easy, way too easy. They advanced toward the main building, each step measured and careful. Morrison could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. His father's voice echoed in his memory. "When everything feels wrong, son, it usually is. Trust your gut." They breached the main building's door. Inside, a single oil lamp flickered, casting dancing shadows on mud brick walls. And there, chained to a support beam in the center of the room, was their asset, a gray-bearded man in traditional Afghan clothing, his face bruised and bloody, his eyes wide with terror. Morrison approached cautiously. Something was very wrong. The man had been beaten recently. His wounds were fresh, maybe hours old. This wasn't how you treated a valuable prisoner you were trying to hide. This was how you prepared bait. "Trap," the man gasped in broken English, blood dripping from his mouth. "They knew you were coming, they." The world exploded into chaos. Automatic weapons fire erupted from every direction. The courtyard walls, the surrounding buildings, the rooftops. Bullets punched through the thin walls, sending mud and stone fragments flying. Morrison's training took over instantly. "Contact all sides," he screamed into his radio. "Fall back to the second building. Move, move, move." The trap had been sprung, and they were right in the center of it. The first burst of gunfire came from the north wall, tearing through the thin mud brick like paper. Morrison saw Martinez spin and drop, blood spraying from his shoulder. Training and instinct overrode conscious thought. Morrison grabbed the wounded SEAL with one hand while laying down suppressive fire with the other, his HK-416 barking in controlled 3-round bursts. "Second building, northeast corner, go, go, go," Morrison roared into his comm. Rodriguez was already moving, dragging the chained asset with him. Doc Williams grabbed Martinez, slinging him over his shoulder in a fireman's carry while returning fire with his sidearm. Chen transmitted their emergency signal as he ran, his fingers working the radio even as bullets whipped past his head. Jackson provided covering fire, his weapon sweeping the rooftops where muzzle flashes bloomed like deadly flowers in the pre-dawn darkness. Morrison counted the enemy positions as he moved: north wall, east wall, south rooftop, west courtyard. They were completely surrounded. This wasn't a hasty ambush. This was a carefully planned kill zone, and they'd walked right into it. "RPG!" Rodriguez screamed. Morrison dove left as a rocket-propelled grenade streaked across the courtyard, slamming into the building they just evacuated. The explosion lit up the compound like daylight, the shockwave throwing Morrison to the ground. His ears rang, his vision swam, but he forced himself up and kept moving. Behind him, their primary exit route had been reduced to rubble and flames. The second building was a 2-story stone structure, more defensible than the mud brick they'd abandoned. Morrison's team crashed through the door, immediately taking up defensive positions. Rodriguez and Jackson secured the ground floor windows. Chen and Williams dragged Martinez to a corner, Doc already ripping open his medical kit. Morrison bounded up the stone stairs to the second floor, assessing their tactical situation. It was bad, very bad. Through the second-floor windows, Morrison could see them, at least 40 hostiles, maybe more, moving with military precision through the compound. Most were Taliban, but he spotted Chechen fighters too, recognizable by their tactical vests and professional movements. These weren't local insurgents. These were trained soldiers. "Chen, sitrep to TOC. Tell them we need QRF now," Morrison ordered, scanning the enemy positions through his scope. Another RPG slammed into the building's exterior wall. The ancient stone held, but Morrison knew they couldn't take many more hits. He moved to a window and engaged, dropping 2 Taliban fighters who were trying to flank their position. Rodriguez joined him on the second floor, his rifle cracking methodically as he picked off targets. "Boss, we got a problem," Rodriguez called out. "They're setting up PKM machine guns on 3 sides. Once those open up, we're done." Morrison saw it too. The Chechen fighters were establishing a crossfire that would turn their building into a coffin. He fired at the machine gun teams, but there were too many targets, too many angles. For every enemy he dropped, 2 more appeared. "Martinez is stable, but he's lost blood," Doc Williams called up the stairs. "I've got the bleeding controlled, but he needs a hospital." "Chen, where's our QRF?" Morrison demanded. Chen's face, visible in the green glow of his radio display, told Morrison everything before the words came out. "Boss, QRF is engaged with another enemy element 12 clicks south. They're taking heavy fire. ETA 40 minutes minimum." 40 minutes. Morrison's blood turned to ice. "What about air support, Apache, fast movers?" Chen shook his head. "Sandstorm rolling in from the west. Tower says all rotary and fixed-wing assets are grounded. Weather's getting worse." Morrison looked at his team. Rodriguez met his eyes with a grim nod. He'd heard everything. Jackson was still firing from the ground floor window, but his movements were slowing, conservation of ammunition kicking in. Doc Williams was bandaging a shrapnel wound on his own arm while keeping pressure on Martinez's shoulder. Chen's hands trembled slightly as he worked the radio, trying to find any asset that could reach them. They were alone. The machine guns opened up simultaneously, a wall of lead that hammered their position. Morrison ducked below the window as stone chips and dust filled the air. The ancient building shuddered under the onslaught. How long would the walls hold? How long before an RPG found the right angle and brought the whole structure down on their heads? "Ammunition check," Morrison ordered. The responses came back quickly, each number worse than the last. Rodriguez had 4 magazines left. Jackson had 3. Morrison himself had 5 plus his sidearm. At their current rate of fire, they had maybe 10 minutes of fighting before they'd be down to pistols and knives. Morrison pulled out his tactical map, looking for options that didn't exist. The compound was 2 kilometers from any cover. The surrounding hills were crawling with Taliban. Even if they could break through the encirclement, they'd be running through open ground with wounded, pursued by an enemy that knew the terrain intimately. They were going to die here. The thought came clearly, factually, without panic. Morrison had accepted the possibility of death the day he earned his trident. Every SEAL did. But accepting your own death and accepting your team's death were 2 very different things. These men were his responsibility. Rodriguez, who had 3 kids and a wife waiting in Virginia Beach. Doc Williams, who was supposed to retire in 6 months. Martinez, bleeding on the floor below, who just gotten engaged last month. Chen, whose parents had fled China to give their son a chance at the American dream. Jackson, who still called his mother every Sunday. Morrison made a decision. He switched to the emergency frequency, the one reserved for absolute last resort situations. His hand was steady on the radio despite the chaos around him, despite the knowledge of what this call meant. He pressed the transmit button and spoke quietly, clearly, into his microphone. Any station, this is Reaper 7-1. We are compromised. 6 souls, 2 wounded. Grid November Whiskey 478235. Enemy force estimated 40 to 50, including Chechen fighters. We are surrounded and taking heavy fire. Request immediate QRF. I say again, request immediate QRF. Send help. Static crackled in his earpiece. Then came the response that confirmed their death sentence. Reaper 7-1, this is TOC. We copy your situation. QRF is still engaged, ETA 35 to 40 minutes. Air support remains grounded due to weather. You are advised to hold your position and defend. No additional assets available at this time. TOC out. Morrison lowered the radio, his jaw clenched so tight his teeth ached. 35 to 40 minutes. They didn't have 35 minutes. They probably didn't have 15. Rodriguez had been listening on his own headset. He moved next to Morrison, shoulder to shoulder, and stared out at the enemy forces massing for another assault. "So," Rodriguez said quietly, "this is how it ends." "This is how it ends," Morrison confirmed. Below them, Chen had stopped trying to raise additional support. He was destroying their encrypted communications gear, smashing hard drives and burning codebooks. Standard protocol when capture was imminent. The enemy couldn't be allowed to access American intelligence networks, even if it meant accepting that no rescue was coming. Another RPG streaked across the compound, this one closer, the explosion showering them with debris. Morrison counted at least 6 RPG teams now, probably more. They were being systematic, professional, softening the target before the final assault. Jackson appeared at the top of the stairs, his young face streaked with dust and blood from a cut on his forehead. "Boss, they're massing on the east side. Maybe 20 fighters. I think they're preparing to rush us." Morrison nodded. "Fall back to 2nd floor. We'll make our stand up here. Tighter defensive perimeter." As Jackson headed back down to retrieve Martinez and help Doc Williams carry him upstairs, Morrison took one last look at the Afghan mountains surrounding them. Dawn was breaking properly now, painting the peaks in shades of gold and red. It was beautiful. His father had always told him that Afghanistan was beautiful in the morning, right before it tried to kill you. Morrison chambered a fresh round, checked his remaining magazines one more time, and prepared to sell their lives as expensively as possible. If they were going to die, they'd take as many enemy fighters with them as they could. That was the SEAL way. That was the warrior's code. The machine gun fire intensified. The enemy was preparing for their final assault. Morrison and his team took up positions at the second-floor windows, weapons trained on the compound below. "Brothers," Morrison said quietly, his voice carrying to each man, "it's been an honor." "Hooyah," came the responses, fierce and proud even in the face of death. They waited for the end to come. And then, cutting through the chaos and the gunfire and the certainty of death, came a sound that would change everything. The sharp, precise crack of a rifle that didn't belong to any of them, followed by the sound of a Chechen commander's body hitting the ground 300 meters away. Morrison's finger froze on his trigger. That shot hadn't come from his team. The sound was wrong, sharper, more powerful, the distinctive crack of a long-range precision rifle. A .338 Lapua Magnum if he had to guess. And it had come from somewhere in the hills, outside the compound. Through his scope, Morrison saw the Chechen commander who'd been directing the assault from behind a stone wall. The man's head had simply disappeared. One moment he was gesturing to his fighters, organizing the final push. The next moment he was falling, his body crumpling like a puppet with cut strings. "Rodriguez, you see that?" Morrison hissed. "I saw it, wasn't one of ours." Rodriguez was already scanning the surrounding hills through his scope, trying to locate the shooter. "Boss, whoever that was, they're at least 800 meters out, maybe more." Another shot cracked across the valley. This time, a Taliban fighter manning one of the PKM machine guns on the north wall jerked backward, a red mist erupting from his chest. The machine gun fell silent. Then another shot. The second PKM gunner dropped. And another. An RPG team preparing to fire simply collapsed, both men falling simultaneously. Impossible unless there were two shooters, but the rifle reports were identical, coming from the same direction. "What the hell?" Jackson breathed, his eyes wide. Morrison's tactical mind raced. The shots were coming too fast for a single shooter to fire, acquire a new target, and fire again. The distances were too great. The angles were impossible. The targets were spread across the entire compound, requiring multiple firing positions. Yet every shot sounded the same, came from the same general direction, and hit with the same devastating precision. "Chen, are we getting any radio traffic?" Morrison demanded. "Any friendlies in the area we don't know about?" Chen frantically worked his equipment. "Negative, boss. No American or NATO assets within 10 clicks. No radio traffic except our own. Whoever this is, they're not on our net." Another shot. A Chechen fighter trying to organize a defensive position fell. Then another. Then another. The enemy fighters who moments ago had been preparing their final assault were now scrambling for cover, firing wildly into the hills, hitting nothing but rocks and sky. Morrison counted the shots in his head. 7, 8, 9, each one a kill, each one surgical, precise, perfect. He'd worked with the best snipers in the SEAL teams, had trained at the Navy Scout Sniper School, and he'd never seen shooting like this. This wasn't just skill. This was something beyond skill. This was art. "Boss, look at the pattern," Rodriguez said, his voice tight with awe. "They're not just killing randomly. They're taking out leadership first, then crew-served weapons, then anyone trying to organize a response. Whoever this is, they're not just a sniper. They're conducting a strategic dismantlement." Rodriguez was right. Morrison watched as another squad leader fell, then the radio operator next to him. An RPG team trying to reposition was neutralized before they could fire. The enemy force was being systematically decapitated, their command structure dissolving shot by shot. The Taliban and Chechen fighters were panicking now. They'd gone from hunters to hunted in the span of 2 minutes. Some tried to flee toward the compound gates. They didn't make it. Others pressed themselves against walls, making themselves smaller targets. It didn't matter. The mysterious shooter found them anyway, somehow predicting their movements, firing through gaps Morrison couldn't even see from his elevated position. 12 shots, 13, 14. Morrison's radio suddenly crackled with static, then cleared. A voice came through, female, calm, with an American accent that carried the flat tones of the Midwest. The voice was eerily serene, like someone commenting on the weather rather than conducting a symphony of death. Reaper 7-1, keep your heads down. You're going to want to watch this. Morrison's blood froze. Who is this? Identify yourself. No response. Just another rifle shot and another enemy fighter fell. How did she get on our frequency? Chen whispered, his face pale. This is encrypted. You need special equipment too. I don't care how, Morrison snapped. Chen, try to triangulate her position. Rodriguez, can you spot her? Rodriguez was already scanning, his eye pressed to his scope, sweeping the hills systematically. Negative. I'm looking at the ballistic trajectories and they're coming from everywhere. The angles don't make sense, boss. It's like she's in 3 places at once. 15 shots, 16. Doc Williams had stopped working on Martinez's wounds, both men staring out the windows in disbelief. Even Martinez, pale from blood loss, was transfixed by what they were witnessing. Jackson had lowered his rifle entirely, his mouth hanging open. This isn't possible, Jackson muttered. This isn't. People can't shoot like this. But someone was. Morrison watched through his scope as the mystery shooter continued her lethal work. A Chechen fighter tried to use a wounded Taliban as a human shield. The shooter put a round through the Chechen's shoulder, spinning him away from his hostage, then killed him with a second shot before his body hit the ground. Precision. Control. Mercy for the innocent, none for the guilty. 17, 18. The enemy force was breaking. Morrison could see it happening in real time. The professional Chechens were trying to organize a fighting retreat, but the Taliban fighters were simply running, abandoning their weapons, fleeing toward any cover they could find. It didn't matter. The shooter hunted them all with the same cold efficiency. Morrison keyed his radio again. Unknown shooter, identify yourself. Who are you? Static hissed. Then that calm voice again. Someone who monitors emergency frequencies. Someone who doesn't like seeing SEALs die on her mountain. Her mountain, Morrison filed that away. What's your position? We can coordinate. No need for coordination, Commander Morrison. Just stay inside and let me work. This won't take long. She knew his rank. She knew his name. Morrison's mind spun. How? Their mission was classified. His team's presence in Afghanistan was need to know. Even the local Afghan forces didn't know they were here. How do you know who I am? Morrison demanded. A pause. Another shot. 19 kills now. Then, I know a lot of things, Commander. I know you have 2 wounded. I know you're down to 40% ammunition. I know QRF won't arrive for another 32 minutes. And I know that if I hadn't been monitoring this sector, you and your men would be dead in the next 5 minutes. So how about you let me finish my work and we can discuss my credentials later? The voice was still calm, almost gentle, but there was steel underneath. This woman wasn't asking permission. She was telling him how it was going to be. 20 shots, 21. Morrison looked at Rodriguez, who shrugged helplessly. Boss, I got nothing. She's a ghost. Another voice crackled over the radio. The Chechen fighters had switched to an open frequency, screaming at each other in Russian and Pashto, their communications discipline completely broken. Morrison's limited Russian was enough to catch words like sniper, demon, and impossible. 22 shots. Morrison moved to a different window, trying to get a better view of the battlefield. Bodies littered the compound now, each fallen in a different position, each killed by a single perfect shot. The surviving enemy fighters, maybe 15 or 20 left, were pressed against whatever cover they could find, afraid to move, afraid to return fire, afraid to do anything but pray they wouldn't be the next target. And still that rifle spoke. 23 shots, 23 kills. Then silence. The morning wind whistled through the compound, carrying dust and the smell of gunpowder and blood. Nothing moved except the smoke rising from the burning building where they'd first found their asset. Morrison's ears rang in the sudden quiet after the sustained battle. His radio crackled one final time. Reaper 7-1, you're clear. All hostiles eliminated or in retreat. QRF is inbound, ETA 28 minutes. Stay put, treat your wounded, and try not to contaminate my crime scene. Someone will have questions about all these bodies. Wait, Morrison started, but the radio went dead, just static now. Rodriguez was still scanning with his scope. Suddenly he stiffened. Boss, I got something. Ridge line, 11 o'clock, maybe 850 meters. Morrison swung his scope to the position. There, silhouetted briefly against the rising sun, stood a figure. Female, slender, with a rifle slung across her back. Even at this distance, Morrison could see she moved with the fluid grace of someone completely comfortable in the mountains, someone for whom this terrain was home. The figure raised one hand, not quite a wave, more like an acknowledgement. Then she turned and disappeared behind the rocks, vanishing as suddenly as she'd appeared. Morrison's radio was still dead, the frequency empty except for static. His team slowly emerged from their defensive positions, moving to the windows, staring at the carnage in the compound below. 23 bodies lay scattered across the courtyard and walls, each killed by a single shot, each positioned exactly where they'd fallen. It looked like the work of a firing squad, not a single shooter. Boss, Rodriguez said quietly, his voice shaking slightly, what the hell just happened? Morrison lowered his rifle, his hands trembling with adrenaline dump now that the immediate danger had passed. He looked at his team, Martinez being treated by Doc Williams, Chen staring at his radio equipment like it had betrayed him, Jackson's young face still locked in an expression of disbelief, and Rodriguez standing beside him, waiting for answers Morrison didn't have. I don't know, Morrison admitted, but somebody just saved our lives. Somebody who knew we were here, knew we were in trouble, and had the skills to do something about it. The voice said her mountain, Chen offered, like she patrols out here, like this is her territory. Morrison looked back at the ridge where the figure had disappeared. 23 shots, 23 kills, 12 minutes from first shot to last. Impossible shooting from impossible positions by an impossible person who appeared from nowhere and vanished just as quickly. Who the hell was she? And how did she know his name? Morrison was still staring at the ridge line, where the figure had disappeared when Rodriguez grabbed his arm hard enough to bruise. Boss, we got movement, south wall, 3 fighters trying to flank us. Morrison's combat instincts overrode everything else. He swung his rifle toward the south wall, acquiring the targets through his scope. 3 Taliban fighters were indeed moving, trying to use the chaos and smoke as cover to get closer to their building. They were smart, keeping low, moving from cover to cover. They didn't have a chance. The first fighter's head snapped back before Morrison could even line up his shot. The second fell mid-stride, his legs crumpling beneath him. The third actually managed to look up toward the hills, perhaps understanding in his final moment where death was coming from before he too collapsed. 3 shots in less than 4 seconds. 3 kills from over 800 meters on moving targets. She's still out there, Rodriguez breathed, still watching us. Another movement caught Morrison's eye, 2 Chechen fighters attempting to escape through a gap in the compound's north wall, abandoning their weapons, just trying to survive. Morrison almost felt sorry for them. The rifle cracked twice more. Both men fell within meters of each other. "That's 28, Chen counted quietly, his voice hollow. "She's killed 28 hostiles." "Thought you said 23. Jackson called from downstairs where he was helping Doc with Martinez. "I did," Chen replied. "I was wrong, I've been watching. She never stopped shooting, she just spaced them out, made us think it was over." Morrison's mind reeled with the implications. The shooter hadn't been finishing up. She'd been methodically ensuring that every single threat was eliminated, taking her time, making absolutely certain that no enemy fighter would be able to regroup or counterattack. This wasn't just marksmanship. This was a hunter ensuring her prey had no chance of survival. Rodriguez was working his ballistic calculator, mumbling numbers. "Boss, I've been tracking the shots. The angles are impossible. She's hitting targets on the north side of the compound, then immediately engaging targets on the south side. To do that, she'd have to move at least 300 meters between shots, but the shots are coming seconds apart. Nobody can move that fast through mountain terrain." "Unless there's more than one shooter," Doc Williams suggested from the stairs. "Same weapon signature every time," Rodriguez countered. "I'd stake my life on it. Same rifle, same ammunition, same shooter. But the physics don't work, Doc. They just don't work." Morrison's radio suddenly crackled to life again, that same calm female voice cutting through the static. "Physics are overrated, Rodriguez. Sometimes you just need to know the mountain better than the people you're shooting." Rodriguez actually jumped, nearly dropping his rifle. "How did she?" "Your comms aren't as secure as you think," the voice continued, a hint of amusement creeping into the professional tone. "Military encryption is good, but it's not that good. Not if you know what you're doing." Morrison keyed his radio, his voice hard. "You've been listening to our internal communications this entire time. Since you whispered, 'Send help,' on the emergency frequency, Commander, that's when I knew I had to move. Couldn't let good SEALs die because of bad intelligence." "Bad intelligence?" Morrison's jaw clenched. "What do you know about our intelligence?" A pause. Another shot rang out. Morrison saw a fighter he hadn't even noticed trying to hide behind a water barrel. The man collapsed. 29 kills. "I know your asset was compromised 3 days ago," the voice said. "I know the Taliban and their Chechen advisors set this trap specifically for you. I know somebody in your intelligence chain either missed it or chose not to see it. And I know that if I hadn't been monitoring this sector, you'd be dead. Your team would be dead. And those Chechens would be stripping your equipment and sending photos of your bodies to Al Jazeera by noon." The casual way she said it, the cold, factual delivery, sent ice through Morrison's veins. She wasn't guessing. She knew. This woman had intelligence that his own command didn't have. "Who are you?" Morrison demanded. "CIA SAD ISA." A soft laugh came through the radio, surprisingly warm despite the circumstances. "I'm someone who used to work for people who use those letters. Now I work for myself. Or maybe I work for the ghosts. Depends on who's asking." "I'm asking," Morrison said firmly. "You saved my team. I deserve to know who pulled our asses out of the fire." Silence stretched for long seconds. Morrison could hear his own heartbeat, could feel his team's eyes on him, everyone waiting for the answer. "You deserve a lot of things, Commander Morrison," the voice finally said, softer now, almost sad. "But my name isn't one of them. Not yet, maybe not ever." "Then what do I call you?" "Call me what everyone else does. Call me Ghost." Morrison's blood turned to ice water. Ghost. He'd heard that call sign before, years ago, in whispered conversations between operators who'd served in Iraq. Urban legends about a female sniper who moved like smoke through enemy territory, killing from impossible distances, appearing and disappearing without a trace. He'd always assumed it was bullshit, war stories that got better with each telling, the operator's equivalent of a campfire tale. But the stories had specific details. A woman who worked alone, a .338 Lapua Magnum rifle, an uncanny ability to predict enemy movements. And one other detail that Morrison suddenly remembered with crystal clarity. Ghost had supposedly saved an entire SEAL team from an ambush in Ramadi in 2003. His father's team. Morrison's mouth went dry. Ghost, the ghost from Iraq, from Ramadi. Another long pause. When the voice came back, it carried something Morrison hadn't heard before: emotion. Your father was a good man, Commander. Lieutenant James Morrison, SEAL Team 3. He had your eyes. Same way of standing, too, like you're always ready for the next fight. Morrison's legs nearly gave out. Rodriguez caught his arm, steadying him, concern written across his face. Morrison waved him off, forcing himself to focus despite the shock rolling through his system. You knew my father. His voice cracked slightly on the last word. I saved your father, Ghost corrected gently. Ramadi, 2003. His team walked into an ambush just like you did today. He was the team leader just like you. He made the same call you made, whispered send help on the emergency frequency, knowing help wouldn't come in time. And just like today, I was listening. Morrison's mind flashed back to his childhood, to a conversation with his father shortly before the old man died from cancer 5 years ago. His father had mentioned Ramadi once, had said something about an angel watching over them that day, about impossible shots from impossible distances. Morrison had assumed it was the morphine talking, the cancer spreading to his brain, making him see things that weren't there. But it had been real, all of it. He never knew who saved him, Morrison said quietly. No, Ghost confirmed. He didn't, and I preferred it that way. I don't do this for recognition, Commander. I do it because some debts can't be repaid with money or medals. Some debts require blood and bullets and watching over the sons of men who should have died but didn't. Another shot cracked across the valley. Morrison flinched, scanning for the target. A Chechen fighter had been crawling through the rubble toward their building, a grenade in his hand. The fighter was now motionless, the grenade rolling harmlessly away from his lifeless fingers. 30, Ghost said clinically. That's the last one. The others have fled far enough that they're no longer a threat to you. Morrison found his voice, though it took effort. Why now? Why reveal yourself after all these years? Because when I heard your voice on that emergency frequency, I heard your father, Ghost said simply. Same tone, same resignation, same acceptance of death, and I realized that I couldn't let history repeat itself. I couldn't let James Morrison's son die in the same kind of ambush that almost killed James Morrison. Some cycles need to be broken. Rodriguez was watching Morrison with concern, but he stayed quiet, letting his commander process what was clearly a deeply personal revelation. Where are you now? Morrison asked, scanning the hills with his scope. Close enough to keep you safe, far enough that you'll never find me. That's how this works, Commander. I'm the guardian you never see, the angel in the shadows, the ghost on the mountain. Your QRF will be here in 23 minutes. Stay inside, treat your wounded, and prepare for extraction. My work here is done. Wait, Morrison started, but he could sense the conversation ending, could feel Ghost preparing to disappear back into whatever shadows had spawned her. Commander, Ghost's voice cut through his protest, firm but not unkind. Your father spent 2 years trying to find me after Ramadi. He never succeeded. You won't either. But know this, I monitor these mountains. I watch over American operators when I can, and if you ever find yourself whispering send help into a radio again, I'll be listening. That's the promise I made to your father's memory, and that's the promise I'm making to you now. I need to thank you, Morrison said desperately. I need to. You need to survive, Ghost interrupted. You need to bring your men home. You need to make sure Martinez gets to that hospital, make sure Chen's hands stop shaking, make sure Rodriguez doesn't have nightmares about today. That's how you thank me, Commander. You honor the gift of life by living it well. The radio crackled with static, then went silent. Morrison tried several more times to raise her, cycling through frequencies, but Ghost was gone. vanished as completely as if she'd never existed. Except for the 30 bodies scattered across the compound. Except for the 6 living SEALs who should have been dead. Except for the impossible memory of shooting that defied every law of physics and probability. Rodriguez finally spoke, his voice quiet. "Your father." Morrison nodded slowly, still staring at the hills where Ghost had disappeared. She saved his life in Iraq 23 years ago, and now she saved mine. That's, Rodriguez struggled for words, that's some serious guardian angel shit, boss. Despite everything, the exhaustion, the fear, the adrenaline crash beginning to set in, Morrison found himself smiling. Yeah, it is. In the distance, he could hear helicopters approaching. The QRF, arriving exactly when Ghost said they would. Morrison took one last look at the ridge line, hopping for a glimpse of the woman who'd saved them. The mountains stared back, silent and empty, keeping their secrets. For 12 minutes, Morrison and his team witnessed something that would haunt their dreams and define their careers forever. They stopped fighting. They stopped moving. They simply watched as Ghost conducted a masterpiece of violence that turned modern warfare into an art form. Morrison checked his watch when the systematic killing began, 5:12 hours. He would never forget that time. "She's moving," Rodriguez whispered, his eye pressed to his scope. "Southwest ridge to northeast outcropping, but that's 1,000-meter movement through alpine terrain. Nobody covers that distance in under 5 minutes. Yet somehow Ghost did. The next target was an RPG team repositioning on the compound's west wall, trying to get an angle on the SEALs building. The team leader was shouting orders, pointing, organizing his men with professional efficiency. Ghost's bullet took him through the throat. The second man reached for the RPG launcher. Another shot. He fell backward, the launcher clattering uselessly to the ground. The third man simply ran. He made it 7 steps before Ghost dropped him mid-stride. "She's not just killing them," Doc Williams observed, his medical training making him analyze the wounds even from this distance. "She's choosing exactly where to hit them. That's deliberate shot placement. She's deciding who dies fast and who dies slow." Morrison understood what Doc meant. The team leader had died instantly, a mercy kill for a competent enemy. The man who'd reached for the RPG had been shot through the chest, dropping him but giving him 30 seconds to drown in his own blood. And the runner had been shot through the spine, paralyzing him, leaving him alive to scream warnings that only increased the enemy's panic. Psychological warfare through precision marksmanship. 12 o'clock West Tower, Chen called out. Chechen sniper setting up a position. Morrison swung his scope to the location. A Chechen sharpshooter was indeed establishing a counter-sniper position in a partially collapsed tower, trying to locate Ghost's firing position. The man was good. He'd chosen an excellent hide, had strong cover, and was scanning methodically with a professional's patience. Ghost shot him through the 6-inch gap between 2 concrete blocks. The bullet somehow found that impossible angle, threading through the narrow opening and hitting the Chechen in the head. His spotter stared in disbelief at the body for 2 full seconds before Ghost's second shot killed him too. "How?" Jackson breathed from downstairs. "How is that even possible?" Nobody had an answer. The next 5 kills happened so fast that Morrison almost missed them. A squad of Taliban fighters tried to retreat through the compound's south gate, 5 men running in a tight formation. Ghost took them down like dominoes. First shot, last man. Second shot, fourth man. Third shot, middle man. Fourth shot, second man. Fifth shot, first man. Each bullet precisely timed so that the men behind didn't see their leaders fall until they themselves were already dead. "She's predicting their movements," Rodriguez said, all coloring his voice. "She's shooting where they're going to be, not where they are. That's Olympic-level target anticipation combined with SEAL-level tactical awareness combined with something I don't even have words for." Morrison watched a Chechen commander try to organize a defensive perimeter, shouting orders, physically positioning his men. Ghost let him work for almost 30 seconds, let him think he was establishing control. Then she systematically killed every man he'd positioned, one after another, in the exact order they'd been placed. The commander stood alone in the center of his dead squad, realizing too late that Ghost had used him to identify all the targets. His death came last, a punishment for his competence. The Taliban fighters were breaking now, their discipline completely shattered. Some threw down their weapons and fled. Some pressed themselves against walls and prayed. Some fired wildly into the hills, hopping to hit something, anything. Ghost killed them all with the same cold efficiency, the ones who ran, the ones who hid, and the ones who fought back. But it was more than just killing. Morrison began to see the pattern, the strategy behind each shot. Ghost wasn't just eliminating threats. She was conducting an orchestra of death, each kill designed to achieve a specific tactical objective. She shot out the tires of 2 technical vehicles positioned for a potential escape, trapping the enemy in the kill zone. She eliminated every fighter carrying a radio, destroying the enemy's ability to call for reinforcements. She targeted ammunition supplies, setting off secondary explosions that spread more chaos. She even shot the locks off a building where civilians were cowering, giving them an escape route away from the combat. "She's protecting the civilians," Chen observed. "Look, every shot she's taking is angled away from that building. She's creating a safe corridor for them to escape." Sure enough, Afghan civilians, women, children, old men, were fleeing through the gap Ghost had created, running toward the safety of the surrounding hills. Ghost's bullets whistled past them, impossibly close, yet not one civilian was touched. She was fighting a 3-dimensional chess match, killing enemies while simultaneously protecting innocents, all while moving through terrain that should have made such precision impossible. Morrison's radio crackled suddenly. "Commander, watch the northwest tower. Man with a Stinger missile launcher. He's targeting your inbound QRF." Morrison's blood froze. A Stinger could take down the rescue helicopters, could kill dozens of men coming to save them. He swung his rifle toward the tower, but it was too far, the angle was wrong, he couldn't. Ghost's bullet found the target before Morrison could even finish the thought. The man with the Stinger fell backward, the launcher tumbling from the tower to explode harmlessly in the courtyard below. "How did she even see him?" Rodriguez demanded. "He was inside the tower behind a wall. How did she know he was there?" "She knows everything," Martinez said weakly from his position on the floor, his voice dreamy from morphine. She's like God with a rifle. She sees all, knows all, kills all who threaten the righteous." "That's the morphine talking," Doc Williams said, but his voice lacked conviction. Because maybe Martinez was right. Maybe that was exactly what Ghost was, some kind of divine intervention wearing camouflage and carrying a rifle. 21 kills, 22, 23. Morrison watched as Ghost systematically dismantled the last organized resistance. A group of Chechen fighters tried to coordinate a fighting retreat, using hand signals to communicate since their radios were dead or their radio operators were dead. Ghost shot their point man, then their rear guard, then picked off the men in the middle one by one as they stood frozen, unable to advance or retreat, unable to do anything but wait for death. The compound had become a graveyard. 30 bodies lay scattered across the ancient stones, each fallen exactly where Ghost had decided they would fall. Some of the enemy fighters who'd fled earliest were still running, tiny figures disappearing into distant valleys. Ghost let them go. They were no longer a threat, and she was apparently not interested in unnecessary killing. Morrison checked his watch. 5:24 hours. 12 minutes from first shot to last. 12 minutes that had transformed a certain death sentence into a complete tactical victory. 12 minutes during which one woman with one rifle had destroyed a force that 40 minutes ago had been on the verge of killing 6 Navy SEALs. The morning sun was fully up now, bathing the compound in golden light that made the carnage somehow more obscene. Morrison could see the faces of the dead, Young men and old, fanatics and professionals, all united now in death. He felt no pity for them. They'd come here to kill Americans and they'd paid the price. But he felt something else, a deep, profound respect for the woman who delivered that justice. "Boss," Rodriguez said quietly, pointing toward the eastern ridge. "Look." Morrison raised his scope. There, silhouetted against the morning sun, stood Ghost. She was too far away for him to make out details, but he could see the rifle across her back, could see her standing tall and unafraid on the exposed ridge. She stood there for 5 full seconds, an eternity in sniper terms, a lifetime of vulnerability, a deliberate choice to be seen. Then she raised her hand, not in a wave or a salute, but in something else. A gesture of acknowledgement, of completion, of farewell. Morrison raised his own hand in response, a gesture that felt inadequate for what had just transpired, but it was all he had to give. Ghost turned and walked away, moving with fluid grace across terrain that would have broken most soldiers. Within seconds, she disappeared behind the rocks, vanishing into her mountain like she'd never existed at all. The radio in Morrison's hand was silent now. The valley was silent. Even the wind seemed to have stopped, as if the mountain itself was holding its breath in respect for what it had witnessed. "Reaper 7-1, this is Rescue 1-1. A new voice crackled over the radio, the QRF finally arriving. "We have you visual. What's your status?" Morrison keyed his mic, his voice steady despite the exhaustion and awe coursing through him. "Rescue 1-1, we are secure. 2 wounded, both stable. Compound is clear. All hostiles neutralized." "Copy that, Reaper. Who neutralized them? We're showing friendly forces in the hills." Morrison looked at his team. Rodriguez shook his head slightly. Chen made a cutting gesture across his throat. Even young Jackson seemed to understand. Some things weren't meant to be reported. Some guardian angels weren't meant to be exposed to official scrutiny. "Hostiles eliminated by Reaper 7-1, Morrison lied smoothly. "We held them off until you arrived." A pause on the other end, skeptical but not questioning. "Copy that. Landing in 2 minutes." Morrison lowered the radio and looked at his team. "What happened here today?" "Never happened," Rodriguez finished. "We held off an ambush until QRF arrived. That's the official story." The others nodded in agreement. Ghost had saved their lives while operating in a legally gray area at best. The least they could do was protect her secret. As helicopter rotors thundered overhead, Morrison took one last look at the eastern ridge where Ghost had disappeared. Somewhere out there, a legend walked alone through the mountains, watching over men who would never know her name. And Morrison was fine with that. Some debts were meant to be carried in silence. The QRF helicopters landed in a storm of dust and rotor wash, disgorging 30 heavily armed Marines who immediately established a defensive perimeter. A Navy corpsman rushed to Martinez, taking over from Doc Williams with practiced efficiency. Morrison watched the organized chaos of evacuation procedures, but his mind was elsewhere, fixed on the eastern ridge where Ghost had vanished. "Sir, we need to debrief," a Marine captain said, approaching Morrison with a tactical tablet. "I'm Captain Hendricks, Reaction Force Commander. Can you walk me through what happened here?" Morrison gave him the rehearsed story: ambush, defensive position, sustained firefight, enemy casualties inflicted by his team. Hendricks listened, his expression growing more skeptical with each sentence. When Morrison finished, the captain looked around the compound at the 30 bodies, then back at Morrison. "Commander, with all respect, the ballistic evidence doesn't support your report," Hendricks said carefully. "These kills, they're all long-range precision shots. Single bullets, extreme distances, angles that suggest elevated firing positions outside the compound. Your team was inside this building the entire engagement, correct?" Morrison's jaw tightened. "That's correct." "Then who made these shots?" Hendricks gestured at the carnage. "Commander, I've been doing this for 15 years. This isn't the result of a close-quarters firefight. This is the work of a designated marksman or sniper team, a very, very good one. Before Morrison could respond, Rodriguez stepped forward. "Captain, does it matter? The enemy's dead. We're alive. Mission accomplished." Hendricks studied Rodriguez for a long moment, then looked back at Morrison. Understanding flickered across his face, understanding that there was a story here that wouldn't be told, couldn't be told, for reasons that probably made sense to someone above his pay grade. "Right," Hendricks said slowly. "Mission accomplished. I'll note in my report that hostile casualties were the result of effective defensive tactics by SEAL Team 7. The pause before effective defensive tactics spoke volumes. "Appreciate it, Captain," Morrison said. As the Marines secured the compound and prepared casualties for evacuation, Morrison walked into the courtyard alone. He needed to see it up close, needed to understand what Ghost had accomplished. The morning sun cast long shadows across the ancient stones, and Morrison moved among the dead like a ghost himself. The precision was even more evident at ground level. Every body showed a single gunshot wound, head, chest, or throat. No wasted ammunition, no follow-up shots needed. Ghost had fired 30 rounds and achieved 30 kills. That was a 100% hit rate at extreme distances against moving targets in complex terrain. It was the kind of performance that shouldn't exist outside of video games and Hollywood movies. Morrison knelt beside one of the Chechen fighters, examining the wound. Entry wound in the chest, slightly left of center. He carefully rolled the body, no exit wound. The bullet had stayed inside, expending all its energy into the target. That level of ballistic calculation required not just skill, but an almost supernatural understanding of physics, wind, distance, and terminal ballistics. He stood and walked to the position where the Chechen commander had fallen, the first kill, the shot that had announced Ghost's presence. Morrison pulled out his range finder and aimed it at the eastern ridge where he'd last seen Ghost. 863 meters, nearly 900 meters, and Ghost had made a headshot on a target who'd been partially concealed behind a stone wall. Morrison's father had told him once, in a rare moment of opening up about his combat experiences, that the difference between a good sniper and a great one wasn't marksmanship, it was patience and understanding. "A good sniper makes the shot," his father had said. "A great sniper makes the impossible shot look easy." Ghost had made 30 impossible shots look effortless. Morrison's radio suddenly crackled, not the standard military frequency, but the emergency channel Ghost had used before. His hand went to the device automatically. "You're trying to understand it," Ghost's voice said, that same calm tone that somehow made impossible things sound reasonable. "Trying to figure out how I did it. You won't, Commander. Not because you're not smart enough, but because you're thinking like a military sniper. I don't think like that anymore." Morrison keyed his mic, keeping his voice low so the Marines wouldn't overhear. "Then how do you think?" "Like the mountain," Ghost replied. "The mountain doesn't care about wind tables or ballistic coefficients. The mountain knows where every rock is, every shadow, every line of sight. The mountain has been here for millions of years, watching men kill each other in its valleys. I just learned to see what the mountain sees." "That's not an answer," Morrison said. "That's poetry." A soft laugh. "Maybe. Or maybe poetry is the only way to explain something that doesn't fit into your military manuals. Tell me, Commander, when you looked at the eastern ridge earlier, did you see firing positions? Or did you see rocks and shadows?" Morrison thought about it. "Rocks and shadows." "Exactly. You see terrain. I see opportunity. Every rock is cover and concealment. Every shadow is a firing lane. Every rise and fall in the ground is a chance to change angles. I don't move from position A to position B like your training taught you. I flow through the terrain like water, taking the shape of whatever space I occupy." Morrison looked around the compound again, seeing it through new eyes. If Ghost had been moving constantly, flowing through the mountains like she described, then the impossible angles suddenly made sense. She hadn't been in 3 places at once. She'd been everywhere at once. Moving so fast and so smoothly through terrain, she knew intimately that she could engage targets from any direction at any time. Your father understood, Ghost continued, her voice carrying a note of sadness. When I saved him in Ramadi, he spent 2 years trying to find me afterward. He finally stopped looking when he realized I didn't want to be found. But he left me something, a letter, delivered through intermediaries, thanking me for his life. He said in that letter that he had a son, and that his greatest hope was that his son would never need the kind of help he'd needed. Morrison's throat tightened, but I did need it. Yes, and that's why I'm here. Your father's letter said that if his son ever whispered, "Send help," into a radio, and if I was listening, he hoped I would answer that call the way I'd answered his. He said his debt to me could only be repaid by protecting his family. So I've spent 23 years monitoring these mountains, listening to frequencies that most people don't know exist, waiting for Morrison to call for help. You've been out here for 23 years, Morrison's mind reeled, waiting for me. Not just for you, Ghost corrected. I protect others too. But yes, I've been listening for your voice specifically. When I heard you on that emergency frequency this morning, heard you whisper those same words your father whispered in 2003, I knew. I knew that fate had come full circle, that I had one chance to honor my promise to a dead man. Morrison's eyes burned. He blinked hard, refusing to let tears fall where his men or the Marines could see. He died 5 years ago, cancer. I know. I was at his funeral. Ghost's voice was gentle now. Back row, dark suit, sunglasses. I stayed for 10 minutes, then left. I'm sorry I couldn't introduce myself then, but anonymity is how I stay alive, how I stay useful. Morrison remembered the funeral, the packed church, the honor guard, the flag-draped coffin. He'd been so focused on his own grief that he hadn't paid attention to the crowd. But now, straining his memory, he could almost see her, a woman in the back, alone, watching from the shadows. Why reveal yourself now? Morrison asked. Why tell me any of this? Long pause. When Ghost spoke again, her voice carried a weight Morrison hadn't heard before, vulnerability mixed with determination. Because you deserve to know, because your father would want you to know, and because, she hesitated, because I'm getting older, Commander. I'm not as fast as I was in Ramadi, not as sharp. The mountains are harder to navigate. The shots are harder to make. And I realize that the debt I owe your father can't be repaid just by watching over you. It needs to be passed forward. What does that mean? Morrison asked. It means that someday, someone will whisper, "Send help," into a radio, and I won't be there to answer. And when that day comes, I hope someone like you, someone who understands what I did here today, someone who knows that some debts transcend duty and regulations, will be listening, will be ready to be the ghost someone else needs. Morrison looked back at the eastern ridge. I don't have your skills. You have different skills, better leadership, stronger loyalty. You bring teams home, Commander. That's its own kind of magic. The world needs both kinds of warriors, the ones who lead from the front and the ones who protect from the shadows. Your father was the first kind. I'm the second kind. Maybe you're both. Before Morrison could respond, Captain Hendricks called out, "Commander Morrison, we need to get your wounded on the birds." "I have to go," Morrison said into the radio. "I know," Ghost replied. "Stay safe, Reaper. The mountains are watching." The radio went silent, returning to static. Morrison clipped it to his vest and turned back toward his team. Rodriguez was helping Martinez to the helicopter, Doc Williams carrying their gear, Chen and Jackson providing security during the movement. His men, his brothers, alive because of a promise made 23 years ago by a woman whose name he still didn't know. As the helicopter lifted off, Morrison looked one last time at the eastern ridge. Nothing moved in the rocks. The mountain kept its secrets, as it had for millions of years. But Morrison knew the truth now. Somewhere in those peaks and valleys, a guardian watched, a ghost walked, an angel with a rifle kept her promise to a dead man. And Morrison understood that he now carried that same promise forward, to listen for the whispers, to answer the calls, to be the help that someone, somewhere would someday desperately need. 3 days after the ambush, Morrison sat alone in a secure briefing room at Bagram Airfield, surrounded by reports, photographs, and ballistic analyses that refused to make sense. Martinez was in Germany receiving treatment. The rest of the team had been debriefed separately, their stories carefully aligned to protect Ghost's secret. Officially, SEAL Team 7 had held off 40-plus hostiles until QRF arrived. Unofficially, Morrison couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't stop trying to understand what had happened on that mountain. He spread 30 autopsy photographs across the table. Each enemy casualty showed the same impossible precision: single gunshot wounds, perfect shot placement, evidence of extreme-range engagement. The ballistics team had recovered 12 bullets from various bodies, all matched. .338 Lapua Magnum, custom match-grade ammunition, probably hand-loaded. The bullets themselves were unusual, specialized long-range projectiles that cost more than $50 each. Whoever Ghost was, she had resources and expertise far beyond standard military issue. Morrison's laptop displayed drone footage from the QRF helicopters as they'd approached the compound. He'd watched it 200 times, scanning every frame for any sign of Ghost. Nothing. The surrounding mountains appeared empty, lifeless. Yet somehow she'd been there, moving through that terrain fast enough to engage targets from multiple positions. "You're going to make yourself crazy," Rodriguez said, entering the room with 2 cups of coffee. He'd been discharged from the field hospital that morning, cleared for light duty. "Boss, we're alive. That's what matters." Morrison accepted the coffee but didn't look away from his laptop. 12 minutes, Rodriguez. She killed 30 men in 12 minutes from distances we can barely shoot from with spotters and optimal conditions. How? Rodriguez sat down heavily, favoring his bandaged ribs. Maybe we're asking the wrong question. Maybe it's not how, but who. Who has those skills? Who operates alone in Afghanistan with no command authority? Who monitors emergency frequencies waiting for SEALs to call for help? That's what I've been trying to figure out. Morrison pulled up another file on his laptop. I've accessed every database I have clearance for: CIA, JSOC, Special Activities Division, even some black budget programs I probably shouldn't know about. Nothing. No female snipers with Ghost's profile. No solo operators authorized in our sector. No one with the right skill set and the wrong lack of official existence. Maybe she's not American, Rodriguez suggested. Morrison shook his head. She spoke perfect Midwest American English. No accent, no affectation. And she knew my father, knew his service record. That's not information a foreign operative would have access to. Rodriguez leaned forward, his voice dropping. "Boss, maybe she doesn't want to be found. Maybe there's a reason all those databases come up empty." Morrison knew Rodriguez was right, but he couldn't let it go. Ghost had saved their lives, had honored a promise to his dead father, had revealed herself just enough to make Morrison understand the depth of the debt he owed. He couldn't just move on, couldn't just file it away as another war story. His radio crackled Chen's voice. "Boss, you need to come to the TOC. Colonel wants to see you immediately." Morrison and Rodriguez exchanged glances. This couldn't be good. Colonel Marcus Reeves sat behind his desk in the Tactical Operations Center, his expression unreadable. He was a career officer, Vietnam veteran, old-school SEAL who'd forgotten more about warfare than most men would ever know. When Morrison entered, Reeves gestured to a chair but remained standing himself. "Commander Morrison," Reeves said quietly, "I'm going to ask you a question and I need the truth. Who killed those 30 hostiles at the compound?" Morrison's mind raced. Rodriguez had been right. The official story wasn't holding up under scrutiny. "Sir, as stated in my report." "Your report is bullshit," Reeves interrupted, not unkindly. "I've reviewed the ballistic evidence, the autopsy reports, the tactical analysis. Those kills came from outside the compound, from multiple elevated positions, from distances exceeding 800 meters. Your team didn't make those shots, Commander. Someone else did. Morrison remained silent, his expression neutral. Reeves sighed, moving to the window overlooking the airfield. 20 years ago, I led a platoon in the Korangal Valley. We got hit hard, ambushed in a village, pinned down, running out of ammunition. I called for help on the emergency frequency, knowing damn well help wouldn't arrive in time. He paused, his weathered face reflecting in the window glass. Then someone started shooting. A sniper we couldn't see, engaging from impossible positions, killing with impossible precision. Saved 17 Marines that day. When we tried to find our guardian angel afterward, there was nothing. No footprints, no brass casings, no evidence anyone had been there at all. Morrison's pulse quickened. Sir. Reeves turned back to face him. The men who served that day gave that sniper a name, called her Ghost. Said she appeared from nowhere, disappeared into nowhere, left nothing but dead enemies and live Americans. Over the next 20 years, I heard that name whispered maybe a dozen times, always in secure facilities, always by operators who'd seen something they couldn't explain, always with the same details. Lone female sniper, .338 Lapua, impossible shots, no official existence. You think she saved us? Morrison asked carefully. I think someone saved you, Reeves said. Someone who's been saving American operators for over 2 decades. Someone who doesn't want credit, doesn't want recognition, doesn't want to be found. And I think the smartest thing you can do, Commander, is accept that gift with gratitude and stop asking questions that won't have answers. Morrison felt his jaw clench. With respect, sir, she knew my father. She told me she saved his life in Ramadi in 2003. I can't just... Your father, Reeves interrupted softly. Lieutenant James Morrison, SEAL Team 3. He came to me 7 years ago, shortly before he died, asked me if I'd ever heard of Ghost. When I confirmed I had, he told me about Ramadi, told me he'd spent years trying to find her, trying to thank her for his life. He never succeeded. He never told me, Morrison whispered. He was protecting you, Reeves said. Some knowledge is dangerous, Commander. Your father understood that Ghost operates in the shadows for a reason. Exposing her, even to thank her, could get her killed, could compromise whatever mission she's dedicated her life to. Reeves moved back to his desk, pulling out a manila folder. I'm ordering you to cease your investigation. That's not a request, it's a direct order. No more database searches, no more analysis of the compound, no more questions. Except that you survived because someone very skilled decided you deserved to survive and move on. Morrison wanted to argue, wanted to push back, but he recognized the finality in Reeves' voice. This conversation was over. As Morrison stood to leave, Reeves spoke again. Commander, off the record, your father left something with me before he died. Said if his son ever encountered Ghost, if you ever needed to understand, I should give you this. He slid the folder across the desk. Morrison opened it. Inside was a single photograph, a SEAL team in Iraq, 2003. His father stood in the center, young and strong, surrounded by his brothers. In the background, partially out of focus, stood a woman in civilian clothes. Intelligence officer, probably, given her position and the tactical laptop visible in her hands. Her face was turned slightly away from the camera, making identification difficult, but Morrison could see enough. Dark hair, athletic build, intense eyes that seemed to look right through the photographer. At the bottom of the photo, someone had written in red ink, REDACTD, classified personnel. That photo is from your father's last deployment, Reeves said. Everyone in it has been identified except that woman. Every database lists her as REDACTD. Every service record, every personnel file, every piece of documentation about that deployment, she's been erased. Professionally, completely, as if she never existed. Morrison stared at the photo, his hands trembling. Who was she? I don't know, Reeves admitted. But I know your father believes she was the woman who saved him in Ramadi. And I know that whatever she became after that photo was taken, she's someone powerful people want forgot." He paused, meeting Morrison's eyes. "Take the photo, it's yours, but Commander, this is the end of your investigation. Whatever answers exist, they're not in my databases or anyone else's. If Ghost wants you to know more, she'll tell you. Otherwise, let her keep her secrets." Morrison carefully placed the photograph back in the folder and tucked it under his arm. "Understood, sir." As he left the TOC, Morrison knew Reeves was right. The official investigation was over, but the photograph burned in his hands like a living thing, a connection to Ghost that was tantalizingly close but frustratingly incomplete. Back in his quarters that night, Morrison studied the photo under a desk lamp, searching for any detail he might have missed. The woman's face remained partially obscured, but there was something familiar in her posture, in the way she held herself, the same fluid readiness he'd glimpsed on that eastern ridge. His father had spent years searching for answers. Morrison realized he might spend the rest of his life doing the same. But as he finally turned off the light and lay back on his bunk, Morrison felt a strange peace. Ghost was out there, watching over the mountains, keeping promises to the dead, protecting the living. Maybe that was enough. Maybe some angels were meant to remain anonymous. His radio, still tuned to the emergency frequency, sat silent on his nightstand. But Morrison found himself listening anyway, wondering if somewhere in the static, Ghost was listening too. 3 months passed. Morrison returned to Virginia Beach, where SEAL Team 7 was based. Martinez recovered and returned to full duty, though he walked with a slight limp now. The team ran training exercises, deployed on routine missions, and gradually the events in Afghanistan faded into the background. Just another war story, just another close call in careers filled with them. But Morrison couldn't forget. The photograph from Colonel Reeves stayed in his wallet, creased and worn from being pulled out and studied 100 times. He'd stopped his official investigation, but his mind never stopped working on the puzzle. Who was the redacted woman? Where was Ghost now? Was she still out there, watching over other teams, answering other desperate calls for help? He tried to move on. He took leave, visited his mother in Colorado, stood at his father's grave and whispered thanks for the guardian angel his father had somehow arranged. He dated a nurse from the Naval Hospital, but broke it off after 3 weeks when he realized he couldn't stop talking about Afghanistan, couldn't stop wondering about the woman on the ridge. Rodriguez noticed. "Boss, you need to let this go. She saved us, that's enough." But it wasn't enough, not for Morrison. Then, on a Tuesday morning in February, Morrison arrived home from a morning run to find an unmarked manila envelope wedged in his front door. No postage, no return address, just his name written in precise block letters, CDRJ-MORRISON. Morrison's hand shook as he opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a photograph, the same photograph from his father's deployment, but this copy was different. Unredacted, crystal clear, and the woman's face was fully visible. Morrison's breath caught. She was younger in this photo, maybe late 20s, but unmistakably the same person he'd glimpsed on that ridge. Strong features, intelligent eyes, an expression that suggested she saw more than most people. At the bottom of the photo, the red text had been changed. Where it once read REDACTED, someone had written in the same precise handwriting, "Captain Sarah Chen, U.S. Army Intelligence, 2003-2015, retired." Sarah Chen, finally a name. Morrison turned to the letter. It was handwritten, the same precise block letters from the envelope. "Commander Morrison, by the time you read this, I'll be gone from these mountains. My work here is done for now. But you deserve to know the full story, the one your father knew but couldn't tell you. Iraq, 2003. I was a junior Army intelligence officer attached to your father's SEAL team, providing tactical analysis and local intelligence. I wasn't supposed to be in combat. I was supposed to stay back at the FOB behind a desk where female officers belonged according to the regulations at the time. But I'd grown up in rural Montana, hunting with my grandfather since I was 6 years old. I could outshoot most of the men on base, and your father knew it. When his team went on that mission to Ramadi, the one that went wrong, he secretly asked me to provide overwatch from a distance. Unofficial, unauthorized. If anyone found out, it would end both our careers. I watched through my scope as the ambush unfolded. I watched your father make the same decision you made, to stay and fight, to protect his men, to whisper, send help knowing help wouldn't arrive in time. And I made a choice that changed my life. I disobeyed orders. I left my position and moved through 3 miles of enemy territory, alone, engaging targets from positions that shouldn't have been possible. I saved your father's team that day. All 16 men came home because I refused to let them die. The army found out, of course. I was court-martialed quietly behind closed doors. The charges were severe: disobeying orders, unauthorized combat engagement, compromising mission security. I should have been dishonorably discharged, possibly imprisoned. But your father intervened. He testified on my behalf, called in every favor he had, made it clear that without my actions, 16 SEALs would be dead. The Army couldn't publicly admit that a female intelligence officer had saved a SEAL team when women weren't officially allowed in combat roles. So they made a deal. I would be retired from official service, my records redacted, my existence erased from all documentation. In return, I would continue to do what I'd done in Ramadi, provide covert protection for American operators, answering only to a handful of people at the highest levels of JSOC. No official status, no recognition, no paper trail, a ghost. I've spent 23 years in these mountains, watching over our people. I've saved hundreds of operators who never knew I existed. I've killed enemies of America who never saw me coming. And I've honored the promise I made to your father, that if his son ever needed help, I would be there. Your father visited me once 5 years before he died. He tracked me down. I let him because he deserved closure. He told me he had a son following in his footsteps, becoming a SEAL, and his greatest fear was that his son would one day whisper, send help into a radio. He made me promise to listen for your voice, to protect you the way I'd protected him. I kept that promise, but now I'm 52 years old and the mountains are harder to climb. My eyes aren't as sharp. My hands aren't as steady. The day is coming when I won't be able to answer the calls anymore. That's why I'm telling you this, Commander. Because the world still needs ghosts, still needs people willing to watch from the shadows, to protect from the high places, to be the help that arrives when no help should be possible. I don't expect you to become what I am, but I hope you'll remember what happened on that mountain. Remember that sometimes the most important work is the work nobody sees. Remember that debts of honor transcend regulations and career advancement. And maybe, someday, when you hear someone whisper, send help, you'll find a way to answer, even if it's not the way you were trained, even if it breaks the rules, even if nobody will ever know what you did. Your father was a good man who understood that some things matter more than following orders. You're his son. You understand too. Stay safe, Reaper. The mountains will always remember what happened there, and somewhere, someone will always be watching. Ghost Sarah Chen. Morrison read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down his face. He finally understood. His father hadn't just been saved by Ghost. He'd helped create her, had fought for her, had recognized that sometimes the greatest warriors were the ones who operated outside the system. He carefully folded the letter and photograph, placing them in a secure box with his father's medals and service records. Then he sat at his kitchen table and wrote his own letter, not to Ghost, because he had no way to reach her, but to himself. A reminder, a promise. I will listen, I will watch, I will answer the call when others cannot. The debt continues. 2 years later, Morrison was leading a mission in Syria when he heard the emergency call. A Marine recon team pinned down, surrounded, whispering desperately for help that wouldn't arrive in time. Morrison made a decision that could end his career. He diverted his team, broke operational protocol, and arrived just in time to save 11 Marines who should have died. The official reprimand came down hard, but in the secure debriefing afterward, Colonel Reeves looked at Morrison and simply nodded. Understanding passed between them, an acknowledgement of the legacy they both carried. And far away, in mountains Morrison would never visit, Sarah Chen sat on a ridge watching the sunset over peaks she'd protected for nearly a quarter century. Her rifle rested across her lap, her hair now streaked with gray, her hands marked with the scars of a lifetime of silent warfare. Her radio crackled with distant chatter, military frequencies she still monitored, emergency calls she still answered when she could. The mountains were vast, and there was always someone who needed a ghost. She smiled, thinking of Commander Morrison, of his father before him, of all the men who'd whispered, "Send help," and found her listening. The work continued. The legacy grew. And somewhere in the shadows between the official world and the hidden world, guardians still watched. Sarah Chen stood, shouldered her rifle, and disappeared into the gathering darkness. The mountain swallowed her without a trace, as it always had, as it always would. Some angels wore wings, others wore camouflage and carried rifles. Both served the same purpose, protecting the living, honoring the dead, and answering prayers whispered in desperate moments. Morrison understood that now, and understanding, he carried the promise forward. The cycle continued. The debt never expired, and in the high places of the world ghosts still walked, invisible and eternal,
Tipo la
watching
classe
over
non classa,
warriors who
perché
would
la prof ha
never
detto
know their
fate quello che
names.
volete, io segno che abbiamo fatto
The end.
qualcosa e fate quello che volete. 2 volte l'ha detto. La classe è uscita tutta, eravamo in 5 in classe, tipo, mio Dio, Ire, quante cazzo di volte hai scritto classe? Mio Dio, l'italiano! Io sono rimasta. Vedi, io sono rimasta in classe. Oh mio Dio, Ire, ti prego, vedi che dovresti starci di più in classe. Bravo, Zino, classe.